We've been talking about Joshua. Last week, of course, we talked a lot about Gezer. And Gezer is mentioned in the book of Joshua. Mentioned Gezer 13 times, a critical city. But we now want to focus back in on our main purpose, and that was, of course, the book of Joshua. And it's a great book, is it not? An excellent book to read of men who really, the limited information that they have, that we have today, the completed scriptures, compared to what they had. And they were able to attempt great things for God and accomplish them. So you stop and look, and that's why obviously many people have this label for the book of Joshua, living by faith, but he's a man that exemplifies faith to the uttermost. He's an interesting character when you start thinking about it. If you go back through history, of course, his mentor was none other than Moses. And so you have to, I always wondered, when I teach this class called Encountering the Biblical World, one of the topics the students can write on is the leadership qualities of Joshua. Obviously, he was the second man in ministry for quite some time till Moses passed away. But what kind of training did Moses give that he gave to Joshua? Because as we move into the book, keep in mind, and we'll show you some pictures in a little bit, that Joshua and the tribes of Israel came out of the wilderness for 40 years, right? 40 years in the wilderness, not quite 40 years, 39. God's grace is always evident. And of course, wandering in the wilderness, all the older folks died off except for the younger generation. And so their life was basically nomadic, wandering through the desert. And you wonder, did Joshua and Moses take time to train a military army to fight? Hand-to-hand combat, war tactics? And then, of course, you want to know, well, what would Moses have done? Where did he get his training? And, of course, we know very well that he got his training from God, but also Egypt. Remember, he was trained and all. And so I ask my students, if you're going to deal with Joshua, you've got to look at the time setting. What do we know about leadership principles? I wonder if Moses took a class in Leadership 101 from the Egyptians. What were they teaching their rulers? How to rule, how to fight. We know they did. And of course, we do have several accounts of tactics and stuff like that, but fascinating study in and of itself. And then Joshua comes along and leads a campaign into Israel. And of course, the campaign, if you do a study of Joshua's age, as he was a spy sent into the land and came out, then you compare it with Caleb's age there in the book of Joshua, you'll see that really the conquest is very short. Probably only 7 years. 7 years, all right? It's not, as we'll see, a march like General Sherman did through the South, destroying everything in its path. That's not the case at all. But nonetheless, we showed you last week, Gezer standing on hill that it was 85 to 100 feet tall with walls, another 50 feet tall with towers all around it, another 20 feet tall. The Israelites had to come into the land and attack these cities. And all they knew was wandering in the desert. Again, what training did they have? You have to have some kind of hand-to-hand combat, training, how to wield a sword. Where did they even get the swords from? Where did they get the spears from? So a lot of interesting questions to look at when we move in here. So therefore, obviously, the book is living by faith. And so last week we looked at the name and the title, and of course a very significant name, is it not? Because Jesus has the same name. Jesus is the same name as Joshua. Anyway, keep in mind where he is in the canon of Scripture. He's the first of the 12 what we call historical books. And so the books of the Old Testament look something like this. All right? This would be the Jewish Old Testament, and this is our Old Testament, where we have the Jews, as you can see, has a total of how many books? 24. Where we have 39. How did that happen? Anybody know? Who gave us the 39 books of the Old Testament? There was a guy living in Bethlehem. Translated the Bible from Greek into Latin. Remember his name? Lived and died there. If you've been to Bethlehem and the church of the Nativity, there's a statue of him there. His name is. Try to make you look it up. His name was Jerome. Remember, Jerome translated the Bible and gave us the divisions. And so the books of Joshua falls underneath of course we have the Torah, the Pentateuch, the first 5 books. And then they had what is called the prophets. They believed every one of these guys were prophets. And so they included the books in the prophets. Even Joshua falls in that in the prophet category. But they're also at the same time historical books, but they didn't classify them as historical books like we do. And of course, any prophet would be included in that. And then we get into the more robust language, specifically poetry, and they have what is called the writings, although they include Daniel, as you can see, Ezra and Chronicles in that book, the later writings. And then, of course, Jerome gave us the historical books, and there's you can see where Joshua falls into in the scheme of things, all right? So I'm not going to go into the structure of the canon at the present time, but just to let you know, there is a difference between the Jewish Old Testament and what we have here. Anyway, we looked at last week at the structure of Scripture. Remember, there's story. There are 4 parts. Usually, if you want to interpret the Bible, you have to look at the story. What is the story all about? What is the structure? How is it developed? What are the sources? And we talked about this last week, that Joshua was not writing in a vacuum. There were already literatures, thousands upon thousands of texts, all right? And there was already a style for how you wrote things. If you're going to write a novel today, you follow in the introduction, the body and conclusion. Well, that was true back then, all right? Literary styles. I gave you a name of one book last week to look at in relationship to myth. Another book, if you're really interested into understanding the types of genres, is by a guy by the name of John Walton, W-A-L-T-O-N. John Walton. He's now at Wheaton College. He was at Moody Bible Institute for a long time, but he's at Wheaton College, and he's a professor of Old Testament. And he has ancient Near Eastern parallels in the Old Testament, a very great, interesting book to read if you're into this kind of information. And he doesn't follow the same motif I do, but he talks about structure. These are, of course, nicely alliterated for you so you won't forget. Structures of Scripture. You have story, structure, sources, and of course, social and historical processes. So we got into the little bit about the story, and you know what it is. Basically, it deals with conquest. And here you got a beautiful picture of the Transjordan before the Israelites moved into the Promised Land. And then we have, of course, the covenant. The covenant. And of course, back up to the conquest, you understand that this is the key book that establishes Israel in the land as a what? Nation, right? A nation. You can't be a nation unless you have land. Obviously, you need people, but you have to have land to be a nation. And of course, remember, they're going to be kicked out by the Romans. Well, they're going to be kicked out by the Babylonians, never to really regain a full state. Kicked out by the Romans in 70 A.D., never to return till when? 1948, yeah, on the British Mandate, were they allowed to come back in. So very important as far as, of course, they're kind of going through a whole conquest all over again, aren't they? With the Palestinians and so on, but that's a different story. And then, of course, covenant is the whole reason they're here in the first place. The covenant God made with Abraham back in Genesis chapter 12. Renewed again in the book of Exodus, and then again in Deuteronomy. And Joshua is going to give us a covenant renewal, the last 2 chapters of the book. And he's going to do it in a specific place, which we mentioned a little bit last week, in Samaria. It wasn't named Samaria then, but in the hill country of Manasseh, there at Shechem. We'll come back to that. And of course, a lot of conflict in between. So the man Joshua, and if you look very carefully at things that we looked at, God is salvation is his name, but critical here is that God acts in history. All right? Unlike any of the other gods in the ancient world, They assume they acted in history, but God makes a statement right here. I told you before that there's no other historical book or religious book in the ancient world where God makes a statement and says, I was there. 2,000 cities, remember? Mentioned in the Bible. Why all those cities? God didn't know what to say, so I'll just throw a couple names in there. Cities. He's telling you, I was there. From Haran, all the way down into Jericho, and then all the way through. God acts in history. Critical. Anyway, history, of course, verifies the validity of God. Although the Bible does not need to be proven, I don't do archaeology to prove the Bible. Who am I to try to prove God's Word? Read it, just read it. But anyway, God, of course, acts in history for this very purpose, to demonstrate who He is. God honors His promises. And of course, we have this unique thing called circumcision, which talked about in the first couple chapters of the book of Joshua. The marker upon the people of Israel that they are God's chosen people. Although circumcision is not unique to Israel, we have reliefs of, and I was going to throw some up there, but I kept my audience in mind, of the acts being performed. The Egyptians did it, so nothing uncommon, but obviously the Jews would be reminded of the covenant they made with God. And then, of course, we have the conquest and division of the land, and then the leadership turnover from Moses to Joshua. Anyway, we looked last week at I told you the main message. Victory comes through faith in God and obedience to His Word, rather than through numerical or military superiority. Because they're vastly outnumbered, vastly outarmed, vastly out, thought as far as tactical and maneuverability. I mean, they're just, good luck. But God used them to, of course, take out a lot of these people that we see here and keep them under control. But anyway, we talked about that last week. Anyway, of course, key people, obviously, we have a couple significant ideas. We have Joshua, obviously, but Rahab comes into the picture. We talked about him, Achan, Phinehas, and Eleazar. Key verse, Joshua 1:8, where it reads, "This book of the law shall" what? "Not depart out of your mouth, but you shall meditate upon it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written therein. And then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have success." Now keep in mind, this was written to Joshua, although some principles apply to us, but this was the people of Israel in a specific promise that, of course, has ramifications all the way back to Deuteronomy chapter 31 and verse 35. All right, and the key chapters of the covenant renewal, chapter 23 through 24, which we talked about. Well, let's take a look at the structure. Here's the structure, 2 parts. We looked at the book of Joshua, conquest, and then the settlement, or then divisions of the tribe. So the book divides very nicely between chapters 1 through 11 and chapters 12 through 24. Although in 22, 23, and 24, we have the covenant renewal. Again, similar, I told you, conquest motifs, accounts that we find in Egypt, called the New Kingdom period, when the Egyptians threw out usurpers that had dominated Egypt. They were called the Hyksos. The Hyksos. Hyksos is a very interesting people. Some people identify them with the Israelites, but kind of puts them a little bit too early in the land of Palestine. But nonetheless, just to let you know, they're called the Hyksos. You might want to check them out, Hyskos, Hyksos, and read about them. Anyway, compared to the book of Judges, where we'll see probably next year, I might be able to teach in the fall, spring, we'll see what happens, but where it's very cyclical: peace, idolatry, adversity, deliverance, and it repeats a pattern over again: peace, idolatry, adversary, deliverance. Kind of like in our own lives, huh? When we get too comfortable in our chairs, we start finding things we like to worship better than God. Adversary comes along, and then we have to cry out to God for help. But all the book of Judges, by the way, is a spiral downward. The last man, of course, is Samson. He dies with his enemies. Dies with his enemies. What an epitaph. Anyway. Well, here's the outline of the book, as I told you. A little bit more detailed, but basically it falls very nicely. 1, entrance into the land, chapters 1 through 5. No battles yet. They perform rites of circumcision. They're down by the Dead Sea at a place called Gilgal. Gilgal. Very important to remember. as we move into the conquest motifs a little bit later on. But anyway, then chapters 13 through 15, conquest narratives. Chapter 5 through that should be chapter 14. No, chapter 5. Oh, that's a misprint. 5, beginning with chapter 5, verse 13, all the way through chapter 12. And then in the division of the land, 13 through 21, and then covenant matters taken there in the text. Anyway, we want to look at the, first of all, when was this book written? Well, notice a couple key things. The Bible, again, is not ignorant that people were going to challenge the historicity of the book. So there are some subtle innuendos and some blatant statements in the books that gives us some very key factors in trying to understand when these books are written. As you look very carefully in the text, we have some that talk about being eyewitness account, where they say, and they are here to this very day. Again, remember, every word in the Bible is significant. Every word is significant. If it wasn't significant, it wouldn't be there, right? God just doesn't add filler. Every word is significant. So even little statements like this, that sometimes you have to keep a sharp eye out onto. Make note of it. Some accounts from their own perspective. In fact, did you know that we have at least 12 to 13 books mentioned in the Old Testament that we don't have? In 2 Samuel chapter 1, verse 18, it talks about the book of Jasher. You ever heard of that book? Never been found. You know where it's at? It's in the bottom of my water system. Yeah. So you better come dig with me next summer as we go down there and look for the book of Jasher. By the way, just a side note, that's one of the most interesting things in Israel. No library has ever been found in Israel. And the quest has been on for years to find a library. There's got to be a library somewhere. I mean, every major city had a library. We have thousands upon tens of thousands of clay tablets. Like at Mari, over 17,000 clay tablets dating to 2300 BC, before Abraham. I mean, so no library yet. But anyway, maybe they'll be found one of these days. But anyway, in Joshua chapter 10, verse 13, and so it talks about the sun standing still and the moon. And of course, over the valley of Ajalon, which is right in front of where Gezer is, right? You know your geography. And that's recorded in 2 Samuel chapter 1, verse 18. Are not all these things recorded in the book of Jasher? And then you have statements like in 10, verse 14, where it says, and there's been no day since this one, as if he's right there present. Yeah, like right here. No day like this one that I can remember, like he's right in first-hand account. Anyway, then Israel and Judah is mentioned, which is kind of interesting. We have latter accounts. Israel and Judah, of course, are not divisions yet. When Solomon dies, the kingdom splits between Israel and Judah. Judah, of course, has been around for a while, but Israel's not. Israel, of course, was the name given to Jacob, but that's when the 10 northern tribes split after Solomon's death. And so they're already included in the text in chapter 11, verse 21. Is this a later insertion? So we have a mix, perspectives from later accounts. Interesting. Anyway, basic material from Joshua's time, but final form appears to be later, all right? And there's no problem with that, because who's superintending the whole project? And that's the key factor, isn't it? It's the word God. It's the word God. He's in control. He knows what he's doing. So what if it's been added later? Does it make a difference? No, because who's in control? Who's God? So anyway, the final form appears to be later. In fact, you have a clear reference in the book of Proverbs. Have you read it? Chapter 20, right where it divides between chapters 24 and 25. And these are the rest of Solomon's Proverbs found by Hezekiah's men. One of the clear references to editing or adding to the text. But anyway, nonetheless, interesting. Well, you can see these sources for all this information. We have ancient conquest account, all right, as you look at the sources. I told you, Joshua just didn't say, I'm going to sit down and start writing the story of how the conquest happened. He was already following a literary pattern that was developed during this time period, all right? And so we have ancient conquest accounts, chapters 1 through 3 and chapters 6 through 8, which fit well, not with Mesopotamian accounts, which we would not expect, but from Egypt, which we would expect, because that's where Joshua came from. That's what Moses was trained from. And so it matches well. This is where scholarship, and we need scholars. I'm sorry, we need people that can write, that can examine, know the text, so that preachers can handle the Word of God accurately, because they don't have time to go back and to look at all the historical accounts. We need professors. If you have a child that seems to be gifted in languages, encourage them. Maybe you should be a professor of Ugaritic, Akkadian, something like that. Anyway, just to keep this stuff straight. Otherwise, it's being dominated by, the liberals. We have the central campaigns, again, ancient accounts, southern campaign, 1 chapter, northern campaign, 1 chapter. And then we have a treaty, which is very significant in chapter 9 with the people called the Gibeonites from the city of Gibeon. So you can see very carefully that the phrases used to describe military conquest at the same time are very unique in the book. Look at these statements, all right? They have caused a lot of problems. By what do I mean? Well, like Yahweh gave the city into the hands of Israel. I don't have a problem with that one. But the next statement where it says, and Joshua put the city, everyone in it, to the sword. Did he kill everybody? Did he kill all the babies? Did he kill all the children? Is that what the statement means?
Probably.
Are these phrases that describe military conquest? Did he actually slaughter everybody? Or is this a statement of way of saying in the ancient world that he took the city and kicked everybody out? Some people died, obviously. Do we have idiomatic expressions today? I'm going to knock your socks off. But are you really going to knock the kid's socks off? Person's socks off? Trump, of course, you remember his famous statement, I'm going to punch him in the face. But he's not going to punch him in the face. Do we have language of expression? So you need to be careful with some of these phrases. There's excellent articles on this topic. You have to, again, you're reading English translations, right? If you really want to know the core of the issue, you're going to have to learn what? Hebrew. Otherwise, you're dependent upon commentators. And you're going to have to do your homework. And so there's a lot of good books out from great conservative scholars that highlight this point. One of the greatest articles is by a guy named Bruce K. Walke, one of the brilliant scholars of our time. Used to teach over here Red Bug Lake Road at that Reformed Theological Seminary. But and he wrote a number of books on Hebrew words and stuff like this. Very brilliant man. I took a class from him. That was a mistake. He was way over my head when I was in seminary. Anyway, the book of Isaiah. But anyway, he's examined all these terms and he compared them with what we have in the ancient Near Eastern literature, and we need to consider these things. All I'm saying is just be careful with some of these terminology. And of course you have, but anyway, so it's interesting to note. And he left no survivors. Phrases like that. And he conquered all the land. Well, we know he didn't conquer all the land. There were a lot of cities still left. The book of Judges tells you what cities were never conquered. And of course, what is going on here then? Well, again, we have, as it says here, phrases that describe military conquest. And we know that, of course, when we'll see as we move through the book of Joshua. In fact, how many cities did Joshua actually burn and destroy? Besides, my uncle knows.
3.
Only 3? Only 3 are mentioned. Not everybody. So I'm saying it's not like a General Sherman. Jericho, Ai, and Hatzor. 3 cities. Key cities within the region: southern campaign, or I should say central campaign, with Jericho being to the east, but then right in the middle, of course, is Ai and Bethel. We're going to talk about those next week probably. And then Hatzor, the key city. And even then it had to be retaken again in the book of Judges by what lady? Deborah and Barak. Remember that story? Well, I thought they conquered it. So anyway, some of these things you've got to take into consideration. This is not a happy Sunday school lesson, all right? It's not your average, everyday little Sunday school class. There's a lot going in the text. It takes years and years of study, and so just let you know. Anyway, we have one of the most fascinating sources ever found, and this one is it. If you've been to Cairo Museum, a couple times. This is the Maranatha. You ever heard of him? You need to. Why? Because this is a source that tells us something very carefully. See this area right here in black? It's the first reference to Israel, the Israelites in the land of Canaan. The only reference we have so far to date. Whoa, this is the only one. By Maranatha, who comes in after the death, of course he's Ramesses' grandson, comes into the land and conquers the land, and he mentions the Israelites. What is fascinating about this text is that the Egyptians have a specific character to identify a people as a nation or as a loose confederation of tribes. It's called the throw stick, just to let you know. And guess what? That symbol is not there. It shows them as being a loose confederation of peoples, which fits well after Joshua's conquest with the book of Judges. So Israel is already in the land, which is fascinating to look. 13th century, it dates about 1220, 1213, somewhere around that time period, BC. Israel is already in the land, which is very critical for understanding exactly what, if you're into the big date of when the Exodus took place and when the conquest took place. I'm not going to get into that, but it's very significant. At least Israel's already there in the land by the late 13th century BC. Fascinating text. Did you know it was there? Maranatha Stela. But this is a source. All right? It's a political document. And that's what we have in the book of Joshua. Did you know that? We have tribal allotments. It's a political document, is it not? Talking about and how do they divide up the tribes? I mean, it's kind of boring reading to a certain extent, but again, all of those things are there as telling you that God, I'm here, I'm watching, I'm taking note. Division of the tribes. Levitical cities, remember those? Yeah, the Levitical cities, very critical for what? Manslayers, right? You killed somebody accidentally? Because they had a powerful code of law back then. It was called what? Lexus Talionis. Eye for an eye. You take my eye, I'm taking your eye. You take my brother, I'm taking you. Come after you. Blood feud, we call it. Hatfield and McCoy's. Anyway, cities of refuge, asylums, list of cities not conquered. Mentioned in the book of Judges. Yep. Anyway, Judges, of course, is a more biographical account when we get into it. So here's the tribal allotments. This is kind of what they look like. A lot of charts. You know, y'all have Google. Go to images. Type in division of the land of Israel. Ask for an image. I mean, these are come out of my books, but you'll get a ton of them. All right, nice colored ones like this. But this is how the tribes were divided. And we'll come back to this a little bit later on. Remember, 2 tribes did not come into the land of Israel, remember? Manasseh, the half-tribe of Manasseh, and of course Reuben stayed on the other side of the Jordan River. Gad, Reuben, I should say, 2.5 tribes. 2.5 tribes. All right, tribal allotments look something like that. Well, what other sources do we have? Back up. We'll come back to this stone because this is at Shechem. Talks about a stone that was erected in a specific place. Some people think they actually found it, but Paul should remember that. We went trekking through Shechem. It's in Palestinian territories today, but nonetheless. Anyway, so we're looking at religious and memorial covenant texts, which we have plenty. Gilgal in Joshua chapter 4, they perform the rite of circumcision. It's a memorial covenant, right? This you shall do. And interesting. Then at Shechem, which is the picture here, which is mentioned in Joshua chapter 8, and then comes back in Joshua chapter 24. The covenant renewal. The covenant renewal. I don't think we'll have time to go into it in this course, but covenant renewal is very critical. This is at Shechem, and I made mention of this last week because Jesus goes to the very same spot. Today it's called Nablus, but he goes to Sychar and the woman at the well. And there, for the first time, he mentions not the Jews, but I'm the fulfillment of this covenant. He had to go to Shechem because it was already predicted in advance. And again, confirmation that this Jesus was the Messiah, right? Because there were a lot of people running around during the time of Jesus claiming to be the Messiah, and he's one of several. But he proved it. Anyway, covenant renewal there at Shechem. And when we have other sources, farewell address, the three graves, remember? Oh, interesting. Then, of course, we'll get to it a little bit later on, but we have the appendices to the book of Judges, where we have a Bethlehem trilogy. Did you know that? A Bethlehem trilogy. The Danite migration starts off with a priest from our grandson, migration of the Danites, and they pick up a priest son from Bethlehem. Gibeah offense, the Levite leaves Bethlehem. And then the book of Ruth, which is a part of the book of Judges, by the way. She's from, her family is from, her mother-in-law, Bethlehem. Isn't that significant, huh? Why? Why would you think Bethlehem would be significant? Because what's the last word in the book of Ruth? The very last word. Come on, scholars. Think about it. Who's from Bethlehem? Who was born there? Besides, not Jesus, because it could be a little bit too early, huh? But who does Jesus come from? David. Jesse begot Boaz. Boaz begot David. David. Whoa! You think the writer's setting you up here? You better believe he is. Setting you up for, anyway, come back to that a little bit later on. Anyway, you have miscellaneous sources, just to let you know, farewell addresses and so on. Social and historical process. This is fascinating to me. I don't know if you know about it, but, well, you do. You do now. Look, you have Semitites, who are not Egyptian. Remember, we talked about, remember, all of this is divided up in the table of nations, Genesis chapter 10. They migrate into Palestine and develop into a state. Whoa. Is that a historical process? Yes. Does it happen over and over again? Yes. Are you seeing it today? Yes. In fact, isn't that ironic? They're coming out of Mesopotamia, infiltrating into Germany, or into Europe, coming over here into the United States. Whoa! Vast social, historical processes. Israel was not the first one because Israel got kicked out. In came the Assyrians, in came the Babylonians, in came the Persians, in came the Greeks, in came the Romans, and they were out of the land. In came the Palestinians, out of the land until 1948. It happens all the time. We'll see with the Philistines as well. Anyway, swift military conquest, as I told you, in the book of Joshua, probably 7 years. New groups of people move in to the hill country. Oh, have you read the text very carefully? It says, and the Israelites did not come down into the valleys because the Canaanite cities were there and they had chariots. Well, if you're going to fight in the valley, you're going to have chariots. They didn't have any chariots. So where did they stay? Up in the hill country. A very good indicator because archaeological surveys find small settlements extensively up in the hill country. We find a swelling of settlements during the what we call the late Bronze Age, around 1400 to 1300 BC. Settlements grow from about 35 to 50 to well over 200. Ho ho! A good indicator that these are Israelites. Anyway, kind of fascinating. So then we have Canaanites still alive within the land. Are they still there, right? Well, the Canaanites, of course, the Greek word for the Canaanites is what? You remember? It's a color. Canaan means a color. Remember the favorite color in the ancient world was? Purple. Now you know what the word Canaanites mean. Purple people eaters. Yeah, they were there. Did you know that? Purple people eaters. Yep. Purple people. Anyway, I wonder if they wore the purple hats too. Different ball games. Anyway, that's the Greek word Phoenician. Phoenician means purple. Same thing. Anyway, still in the land. They're there all the way through Solomon's time. Remember? Told him last week, Gezer was conquered by Pharaoh as Solomon married his daughter and given to him as a dowry. Interesting. Anthropological processes, you've got nomads becoming sedentary. That's interesting. That whole process of how does it happen? Because you read in the text, and obviously it's not an extensive text, but all these things are going on in the background which influence the text. So if you really want to be a scholar, I mean, you've got, there's a lot of work. and I feel like after 30-something years, I'm still a novice sometimes, I feel like it. But anyway, all this takes place. And of course, nomadic life to sedimentary. In fact, in modern times, the Jewish nation gave the Bedouin, they are the nomads today, built them nice settlements down in the Negev, in the desert area, which is pretty nice, not too bad. Anyway, when they built these nice settlements for the Bedouin, you know what they did? They put all their animals in the houses, and they lived in the tents still on the outside. Fascinating. Anyway, big process. And then major themes, therefore, and issues in the book. Obviously, the conquest. Oh, big issue today. Was it partial or total conquest? You saw some of the phrases used. What about holy war? Some things were banned, right? Some cities were totally destroyed, set on fire. This, God says, with his destruction of Jericho, shall be an offering to me. Holy war. And this, of course, what sets it apart from us just going to war with our neighbors and friends. This is God's holy war. Everything that he does is just, is righteous, is it not? Very important. And you look at the text here. So this is holy war, all right? And of course, God is going to have holy war again a little bit later on, called the Battle of Armageddon, if you believe. That's the real battle that's going to take place. But holy war on God's behalf. Then at the same time, you have sovereign intervention as he makes his presence known and was able to help the Israelites defeat this tremendous foe. Covenant in the land, we already talked about. And then the unification of Israel. Well, the conquest of the land. A couple things to note. Back up. There are central campaigns that deals with chapters 5 through 9. The central hill country of Israel, right here. The central campaign. Because Joshua is going to come into Jericho. Right? We'll look at that. Try to get into that tonight. I don't know. But this is a whole back door. This is the back door coming in from the east. No one comes in from the east. Why, you say? I'll show you in a minute. It's all geography. Everybody comes in through the front door. Right here's the front door. This is the front door. Assyrians came through this way, right through our little valley right here called Bet Shemesh. All right, right up through here, or excuse me, the Ajalon Valley by Beth Horon, right here, up to Gibeah. Now right away, you see the significance of the Gibeonites. They protect the entrance up into the hill country. Anyway, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, everybody comes up this way. But Joshua says, let's go this way. Very unusual approach. Back door. The central campaign we're going to look at. Then we have the southern campaign where they come down and knock out in one chapter the desert areas. And then we have one chapter dealing with the northern campaign. And that's it. Obviously, not extensive, but altogether 6 nations are identified. 31 kings are mentioned in the text. Wow, that's quite a bit. Huh? So that's what we want to look at. There's the central campaign. We'll come back to this in a moment just to show you. There's a lot of good maps. You can go online and look at it. Looking at Jericho, somewhere over here in Gilgal, they camped out, and then they attack Jericho, and then he has to make a trek. Because Jericho is what, class? The lowest city on the face of the earth, right? Because the Dead Sea is the lowest spot on the face of the earth, right? 1,297 feet to be exact, below sea level. By the way, it's from here to the Mediterranean Sea is only 65 miles. Whoa, you hope the mountains keep everything out. Anyway, so you got to go from 660 feet below sea level to almost 3,000 feet above sea level. That's almost a 4,000 feet hike in a matter of 10 miles. Whoa, that's why no one comes this way. don't want to come this way. It's too difficult. Too difficult. Anyway, we'll come back to that a little bit later on. Then we have of course, that one had the northern, that's the southern campaign, a little bit further south. And then, of course, the northern campaign. And then, of course, so we have to ask the question. There are some very significant texts within the book. If you go to Joshua chapter 11, verse 16, as it concludes the northern campaign, the text says this in chapter 11, verses 16 and following. Verse 16, it says, "Then Joshua took all that land, the hill country." You got to know your geography here. The hill country, the Negev, the southland, all the land of the Goshen, the lowlands, Shephelah, where Gezer is, the Arabah, you all know what the Arabah is, that's the Jordan Valley, and the hill country of Israel and its lowlands, from Mount, I have a text written, I think it's Halak. Yep, we're not sure where that is. Central Negev, we think, down to the south, that rises to, towards Sithi, even as far as Baal Gad, which is on the other side, Transjordan, and the valley of Lebanon and the foot of Mount Hermon. And he captured all their kings and struck them down and put them to death. Interesting. But then in chapter 13 and verse 1, you read this. "Now Joshua was old and advanced in years, when the Lord said to him, 'You are old,'" thanks a lot, God, "and advanced in years, and very much of the land remains" what? "To be possessed," conquered. See what I'm saying? Language of. And so what's going on? Chapter 11 is a summary statement, maybe? Chapter 11 is a summary statement. Chapter 13 shows still pockets of resistance. Remember, Joshua just says, "I'm going to knock out the key boys." It's up to the tribes now to do the mopping up operations. Some tribes mopped up the operations, other tribes did not, as we'll see in our study. So, this is the total land all the way up into here. This is the land that was promised from the river Euphrates down to the river or the brook of Egypt. What the brook of Egypt is, there's a huge wadi down here called Wadi, as you can see, Arava here. Or some people think even Wadi Basor, but that's too short. But right down here, some people think, which is the dividing line today close with Egypt, but not real sure exactly where the brook of Egypt is. Not real clear. But anyway, a couple things about holy war. You have all these principles are laid out in the book of Deuteronomy. It was very clear how to do it. The right way, Jericho, and the second attack on Ai, by the way. We'll come back to that. Keep that in the back of your mind. The right way for holy war, to do exactly what God told you to do. And they did it. Of course, remember Achan stole the bacon. And then the second is the attack on Ai. All right? Are there wrong ways? You can look up these principles. Yes, the first attack on Ai, remember, Joshua did something he didn't ask. There's no prayer for it. And then there's the treaty with the Gibeonites. There's no record of Joshua asking God, "Hey, should I make a treaty with these people?" Of course, God said, "Wipe them all out." Remember, they disguised themselves? Interesting. Anyway, just to let you know. So we also have a divine warrior and sovereign intervention, as I mentioned. Whoa, Joshua chapter 10, verse 14. "There was no day like that before it or after it, when the Lord listened to the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel." Wow. Proverbs 21:31 says, "The horse is made ready for the day of battle, but victory rests with the Lord." You can have the fastest horses and chariots, but if God doesn't want you to win, guess what? You know, there's a phrase in the New Testament. Remember what it says? If God be for us. But you know the reverse is true? If God is against you, who's going to be for you? Nobody. Anyway, kind of fascinating look. And then of course, we have the covenant of the land. We'll come back to this a little bit later on. But Genesis chapter 15, the book of Joshua, God fulfills his covenant promises to Abraham. And of course, God worked out his promises and through his people. The unity of Israel, of course, is also a very significant concept. You have corporate solidarity. Fascinating, isn't it? As you look throughout all the Old Testament, you come to the book of Kings, and you see Solomon dies, and it still says, and the 10 tribes, no, you're supposed to be one, not 10 tribes. And the 10 tribes came up to Rehoboam and says, listen, lighten our load. He still calls them the 10 tribes. They've been in the land for a couple hundred years, and they haven't solidified. That's not going to happen during the reign of Christ. Everybody's going to be one, by the way. Then, of course, look, the sin of Achan. We'll come. I don't know if we'll get a chance to talk about it, but he stole the garments, remember? But it came down to his family, and all of his family was put to death. That means everybody knew about it. Everybody was participant in it, and were punished. Corporate responsibility, community responsibility. God wants a family. And remember, that's true in the New Testament, is it not? And Trump is quoting the great passage, isn't it? By this, of course, you shall know me by what? Love for one another. That's what sets us apart from the rest of the world. Anyway, kind of fascinating. Community responsibility. Well, as we look at the conclusion, what are we doing? Living by faith. And so obviously areas in our own life that need to be conquered. We'll see that beginning next week with the conquest of Jericho. But well, maybe we'll just dabble in. We got 5 minutes. Is that okay? Anyway, living by faith, all right? Great concept of the book. No question about it. Any comments? Suggestions? If I can get the right button, I forgot my mouse. There we go. So we'll come out of this and just introduce you to the conquest. And I'm going to try to get Google Earth going. Y'all on Google Earth? Type in any city, Jericho, A-I, it's pronounced, Bethel. Google Earth takes you right there to them. They have all the archaeological sites. Fascinating. Go anywhere. Babylon, all those places. Even Nineveh, Korsaba, all that's there. Anyway, so let's take a look, and then where we want to go next week. Anyway, we're dealing with, I told you the time frame of the conquest. There are 2 dates. If you take a look at the prayer that Solomon made when he dedicated the temple, he makes a statement. He uses a number. He says it's been 480 years since Israel came out of the land, out of Egypt. 480 years, of which is repeated again in the New Testament by Paul. 480 years. He uses the same phrase. We know when Solomon dedicated the temple based upon the chronology of certain kings, like we have Shishak coming up into the land, mentioned soon after Solomon's die. We know exactly when his account takes place. Then we have certain other kings that we can date. And this is, of course, a problem called absolute dating, which is very fascinating to look at. There are some very great books. One is called The Mysterious Numbers of the Hebrew Kings, if you're interested in a guy by the name of Thiele, trying to decipher all the different, and he reigned for so many years, and then, because there's a lot of overlapping within the kings. But like Hezekiah, we know exactly from Sennacherib's prism and some of the others we can date. We can move things back. We date the dedication of the temple about 931. You add 480 years, that puts us back, of course, about 1400, 1420 BC. This is called the late date. The late date. Well, there's a problem archaeologically because during the period between 14 and 1300 BC, there's no Israelite settlements. And so people have been shifting to a 13th century date for the conquest, and that puts those settlements in perspective that I made mention to you a while back. And so that's called the first one is called the early date. This is called the late date. So we have the early daters and we have the late daters, all right? Maybe you were that in life when you started dating, early or late. Anyway, something like that. And it's an interesting argument back and forth. People say, well, what do you do with the number, 480 year? Well, we know that generation was every 20 years, maybe 40, and some of the scholars say it's just a generational. It's not meant to be taken literally. Well, you have it repeated again in the New Testament, so it's kind of problematic. So there are issues with the conquest, but I put up here the going date of 1200 to 1000 BC. And of course you have one other date if you're familiar with it. Again, the text is very interesting. puts little innuendos. If you remember when Japheth, not Japheth, goes over and fights the people in Moab, he talks about, why are you harassing us? Like Jephthah. He says, why are you harassing us? We've been in the land for over 200 something years. Kind of fits well with the 480. So all those little things are in the text. Fun to study out. Look at. Anyway, as I made mention, we're going to look very carefully. This is, of course, the Sinai where they were wandering, and they migrate across over to Jordan and come in right up here, of course, at the Dead Sea, and then conquer the land. The land, of course, is pretty expansive. The Sinai, we're dealing with specifically the Brook of Egypt, somewhere right down in here, and I'll show you next week that on the Google Earth all the way up into parts of Syria. So very fascinating. But one of the guys you might want to study up before next week is this bad boy right here. Ramses III. Ramses. Whoa. Very significant because he fights with, they're called the people of the sea. The sea people, says they're called. Why is this significant? Decline of Egypt. It allows Israel to be a nation. You have the book of Deuteronomy. God says very carefully, you trust me, everyone around you will be weak. You disobey me, they're going to come in and get you. And so you see that pattern over and over again throughout the Old Testament. Kind of fascinating. All right, we'll see you all next week. Thanks for joining us.